Across the ancient world, stone was shaped, moved, and fitted with a level of precision that still unsettles modern assumptions. Blocks weighing tens or hundreds of tons were cut cleanly, joined without mortar, and aligned with care, often in places where no metal tools, machines, or written plans appear to have existed. For generations, this gap has been filled with speculation, lost civilizations, erased technologies, knowledge deliberately hidden. Yet the stone itself tells a quieter story, one not of power, but of patience, not of machines, but of observation, not of force, but of time. Stone was shaped with intention long before rulers measured angles or iron blades cut straight lines across continents. Blocks weighing tens or hundreds of tons were quarried, moved, and placed with a level of control that resists simple explanation. The work did not appear rushed. The surfaces suggest care. In many locations, the stone carries marks that do not match the tools believed to exist at the time. At Sacsayhuan, stones weighing over 100 tons interlock in complex forms. Their faces are curved. Their edges are irregular, yet they meet without gaps. The official explanation points to hammerstones and prolonged labor. The surface marks, however, do not always agree. In Egypt, granite blocks quarried at Aswan were used in temples and sarcophagi hundreds of kilometers away. Granite ranks high on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper tools, the ones typically assigned to the period, deform quickly when struck against it. Experimental archaeologists have reproduced small cuts using sand and copper over extended periods. The result shows rough channels, yet many ancient cuts appear smooth with consistent depth and straightness that does not wander. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan offers a frozen moment. Carved directly from bedrock, it cracked before removal. The trench around it shows long grooves with rounded bottoms. Some researchers have measured these channels and noted their uniform width. The marks repeat at steady intervals, as if made by a process rather than individual strikes. No copper chisel leaves such traces. Even today, similar grooves appear when modern rotary tools are used. In the early 20th century, engineer Reginald Engelbach examined tool marks on Egyptian stonework. He noted that some cuts behaved like soaring rather than chiseling. Later in the 1980s, Christopher Dunn measured drill holes in granite artifacts. He observed spiral grooves inside the holes indicating rapid feed rates. According to modern machining standards, the implied pressure and speed exceed what hand-driven copper drills could achieve. These observations do not prove advanced machines. They point instead to missing steps in understanding. Ancient texts rarely describe technical processes in detail. Knowledge passed through apprenticeship, not manuals. If a method worked, it was used. If it relied on abrasion, thermal stress, or repeated correction, it may not leave obvious remains. In India, temples such as Ellora were carved from solid basalt cliffs. The removal volume is immense. The walls are straight, the floors are level. The ceilings show smooth transitions. Basalt is tougher than limestone. Iron tools existed in later periods, but the earliest phases show control that seems disproportionate to the tools assigned. The work proceeded from top to bottom, a risky method that requires planning before the first cut. Some ancient sources hint at unconventional techniques. Roman writer Pliny the Elder described stones being split using wooden wedges soaked in water. As the wood expanded, the stone cracked along predictable lines. This method uses pressure, not cutting. Similar techniques appear in China and Japan centuries later. It is slow but effective. It leaves clean breaks without metal. Other accounts speak of heat. Rapid heating followed by cooling can fracture stone. Fire setting was used in ancient mining. A fire is built against rock, then quenched with water. The thermal shock causes cracking. Repeated carefully, it allows shaping without direct impact. More speculative ideas persist. In the 18th century, French explorer Jean-Marie de la Condamine wrote of Inca legends describing stones that softened when treated with plant extracts. Similar stories appear in Amazonian oral traditions. No verified substance has been identified. Some plants do produce acids capable of etching limestone. Granite resists most organic acids. The stories may be symbolic, or they may preserve distorted memory of a lost method. The transportation of stone adds another layer. Moving blocks across uneven terrain without wheels or iron requires planning. The common explanation involves sledges, rollers, and large labor forces. Wall reliefs in Egypt show statues moved on sledges lubricated with water. This reduces friction. It works. Yet it does not explain all cases such as uphill placement of massive stones at high altitude. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the triathlon stones weigh over 800 tons each. They were quarried nearby but lifted and set with precision. The Roman era had cranes and pulleys, but calculations suggest limits below these weights. Some researchers propose earth ramps. Others suggest step-by-step levering. No definitive construction remains survive. What stands out is repetition. The same problems were solved in different places with similar results. Hard stone was shaped cleanly. Massive blocks were moved. Tight joints were achieved. The solutions may have varied. The underlying principles may have been simple but effective. Pressure, abrasion, time, and careful measurement can do much. The absence of clear tool remains complicates interpretation. Tools wear out. Wood rots. Copper is recycled. Stone endures. What survives is the result, not the process. Modern assumptions favor visible effort, blows, cuts, sparks. Ancient methods may have favored quiet repetition. In this documentary, we set aside dramatic theories and examine the evidence directly. Quarries, unfinished blocks, surfaces, joints, failures. By looking closely at what remains, we begin to understand how ancient builders worked with stone, not against it, and why their methods still challenge the way we think about technology today. But before we can understand how precision emerged without power, we must first confront what the silence in the stone actually means, and why it has unsettled every generation that stood before it. The stone does not explain itself. It sits in place, heavy and finished, offering no record of the hands that shaped it or the time it required. What remains is the outcome, precise, enduring, and silent across continents. This silence repeats. The walls stand, the joints hold, and the tools that should have made them possible are absent. This absence has defined the mystery for centuries. At Sakai Huan, blocks weighing more than 100 tons interlock without mortar. Their surfaces are not flat, they curve, they bulge. Yet where two stones meet, the fit is so tight that nothing passes between them. No gap, no filler, just stone pressed against stone as if the material itself had softened and then hardened again in place. At Baalbek, the trilithon stones rest in the foundation of a Roman temple. Each stone weighs over 800 tons. They were quarried nearby, lifted and set with such care that the joints remain nearly invisible. Roman engineering is well documented. Cranes existed, pulleys existed, but the calculations do not support weights of this scale. The stones should not be there, yet they are. At Allah, entire temples were carved from single cliffs of basalt. The work did not involve stacking or assembly. It was subtraction. Stone was removed carefully, systematically until what remained was a structure. Walls, ceilings, columns, and doorways emerged from solid rock. The floors are level. The ceilings are smooth. The transitions between surfaces show no wandering, no correction, no second attempt. These sites share more than ambition. They share a set of features that do not align easily with the tools historians assigned to their periods. The stone is hard granite, basalt, and seat materials that resist cutting even with modern equipment. The joints are tight. In many cases, they are tighter than what contemporary construction achieves. The masses are extreme. Blocks exceed the capacity of known lifting systems by wide margins, and the mortar is absent. The stones do not rely on binding agents, they rely on fit. For generations, this combination has been explained in two opposing ways. One explanation invokes lost advanced technology, machines that vanished, civilizations that collapsed and left no trace, knowledge that was deliberately erased or hidden. This explanation satisfies the intuition that precision requires power. It assumes that if the work appears advanced, the tools must have been advanced as well. The other explanation invokes brute force, thousands of laborers, decades of effort, primitive methods applied with relentless repetition. This explanation satisfies the assumption that ancient societies were simpler, slower, and less capable. It assumes that time and labor can substitute for technique. Both explanations feel incomplete. The first requires evidence that does not exist. No remains of advanced machinery have been found. No components, no diagrams, no references in surviving texts that describe anything resembling the tools such precision would demand. The second requires inefficiency that does not match the results. Brute force produces rough surfaces, wandering cuts, and inconsistent joints. It does not produce the controlled geometry found at these sites. Labor alone does not explain smoothness, it does not explain uniformity, and it does not explain why similar methods appear across distant cultures that had no contact. There is a third possibility. Stonework may imply quiet systems, not machines that left no trace, but methods that required no machines. Techniques grounded not in power but in patience, in observation, in cumulative correction, in an understanding of stone that treated it not as an obstacle to be conquered, but as a material to be negotiated with. This possibility does not announce itself. It does not leave dramatic remains. It does not fit easily into categories of primitive or advanced. It exists in the space between where intelligence is applied without spectacle, where progress is measured in seasons rather than hours, and where the absence of tools is not evidence of impossibility, but evidence of a different kind of discipline. The stone remembers this discipline not in what it says, but in what it does not say. It does not record haste. It does not record failure. It does not record the stages of learning that must have preceded the final result. What it records is only the last step, the moment when the work was complete and the process could be forgotten. That forgetting is what we inherit. And the question it leaves behind is not about what was lost. It is about what we no longer recognize. If ancient builders did not rely on power or advanced machines, what did they rely on instead? The answer was not hidden in technology, it was hidden in time. Modern experiments with ancient stonework methods often fail, not because the methods are impossible, but because they are conducted under modern assumptions. Speed is prioritized. Results are expected within hours or days. Force is applied where patience was once the primary tool. And when the outcome does not match ancient precision, the conclusion becomes they must have had something else. But what if the variable was never the tool? What if it was the calendar? In the 1990s, experimental archaeologist Dennis Saint attempted to replicate ancient Egyptian granite drilling using copper tubes, sand, and water. The method was simple. A hollow copper tube was rotated over the stone. Quartz sand, harder than granite, was fed into the space between copper and stone. Water carried debris away and reduced friction. The tube did not cut. The sand did. The process was slow. Over the course of several hours, stocks managed to drill a shallow hole. The walls were rough. The depth was inconsistent. Critics pointed to the results and argued that ancient granite work must have required something more efficient. But Stocks was working within a modern time frame. He was measuring progress in hours. Ancient builders measured it in weeks, in months, in seasons. When time is treated as abundant rather than scarce, repetition becomes viable. A rough cut can be corrected. A shallow groove can be deepened. A surface can be polished until it reflects light. Precision emerges not from a single motion, but from 1,000 small adjustments, each one invisibly slight, each one cumulative. This is not the way modern construction thinks. Modern construction equates speed with efficiency, power with capability. A machine that cuts quickly is considered superior to one that cuts slowly, even if the slower method produces a smoother result. Accuracy is expected immediately, not iteratively. But ancient stonework suggests a different logic. Accuracy was not demanded in the first pass. It was refined across many passes. A surface was not finished when it was cut. It was finished when it stopped changing. Polishing stones recovered from ancient Egyptian sites show wear patterns consistent with prolonged use. The stones are smooth on one side, worn down by repeated contact with harder surfaces. They were not struck. They were rubbed again and again until the surface beneath them became flat. At Aswan, the grooves in the unfinished obelisk trench are uniform. They do not wander. They do not deepen suddenly or taper off. This uniformity does not suggest rapid hammering. It suggests controlled repetitive motion. A tool held steady, pressure applied evenly. The process repeated until the stone yielded. The mystery is not how the cuts were made. The mystery is why modern observers expect them to have been made quickly. Power and precision are not synonyms. A jackhammer breaks concrete efficiently, but it does not produce smooth edges. A rotary saw cuts wood quickly, but it leaves burn marks. A water jet slices steel with minimal force, but it requires pressures that take time to generate. In every case, speed trades away something: control, finish, consistency. Ancient builders did not have speed, but they had control. They also had gravity. Leverage allows small forces to move large masses if motion is incremental. A block weighing 50 tons cannot be lifted in a single motion by human effort, but it can be raised 1 centimeter at a time. A wooden lever inserted beneath the edge. A stone placed in the gap. The lever removed and repositioned. Another stone added. The process repeated until the block rests on a platform high enough to slide rollers beneath it. This method leaves no dramatic remains. The levers rot. The stones are reused. What survives is only the block itself, now in a position that seems impossible. Once elevated, gravity becomes an ally. A stone placed on an incline will slide if friction is reduced. Water does this, oil does this, rollers do this. The stone does not need to be carried, it needs only to be guided. At placement, gravity completes the work. If a stone is lowered onto another with care, it will settle into the lowest position available. If both surfaces are nearly flat, the contact will be nearly complete. If both surfaces are polished, the fit will be tight. The stone does not need to be forced into place. It falls into place. This is why ancient joints are often tighter at the bottom than at the top. The weight of the stone pressed it down as it was set. Any irregularities at the base were compressed. The fit improved under its own mass. None of this requires machines. None of it requires metal. It requires only observation, of friction, of leverage, of weight, and the patience to let these forces work gradually rather than instantly. And yet, despite the simplicity of these methods, something remains unexplained. the tools themselves? If abrasion worked, why do we find so little evidence of the abrasives? If wooden levers were used, why do no preserved examples exist? If copper tubes drilled granite, where are the worn-out tubes? The methods may have been effective, but the instruments that carried them out have vanished almost completely. Meanwhile, another mystery remained unresolved. If these methods worked, why do we find so few tools left behind? The absence of tools is not evidence of their absence, it is evidence of their nature. When archaeologists excavate ancient construction sites, they find stone, they find pottery, they find metal objects that survived corrosion, blades, chisels, hammers, but they rarely find the full system that made the work possible. What remains is durable. What vanished was functional. This creates a distortion, a bias in the archaeological record that mistakes survival for significance. Stone endures because it resists decay. Metal endures if conditions are dry or oxygen poor. But wood rots, fiber disintegrates, leather dries and crumbles, rope unravels, and once these materials are gone, the methods they enabled become invisible. Consider the wooden wedge ply the elder described, a technique used to split stone in Roman quarries. Wooden wedges were driven into narrow channels carved along the desired fracture line. Water was poured over the wedges. As the wood absorbed moisture, it expanded slowly, steadily. The pressure built until the stone cracked along the line of least resistance. This method requires no metal. It produces clean breaks. It can be scaled to blocks of any size. And it leaves behind only the split stone and a few shallow grooves. The wedges themselves rot within years, decades at most. After 2,000 years, nothing of them remains. Yet the method worked. Roman quarries produced millions of tons of stone using techniques like this. The evidence is not in the tools. It is in the output. The same logic applies to rope. Rope was used to lower blocks, stabilize loads, and coordinate movement across teams of workers. Fibers were twisted from plant material, flax, papyrus, palm, hemp, depending on region and availability. These ropes were strong enough to bear significant weight. Egyptian tomb paintings show thick cables used to haul statues. The ropes are depicted clearly, but none have survived. Fiber decomposes rapidly in most climates. Even in Egypt's dry conditions, only fragments remain, usually preserved by chance in sealed tombs or under specific mineral conditions. The working ropes used in construction were exposed to sun, moisture, and friction. They wore out. They were discarded. They returned to the environment. What this means is that entire systems of lifting, lowering, and stabilizing stone are invisible to us now. Not because they did not exist, but because their components could not outlast the work they performed. Leather padding served a similar function. Placed between stone and lever or between rope and block. Leather distributed pressure and prevented damage. It allowed heavy loads to be moved without chipping edges or fracturing corners. But leather, like wood and fiber, degrades. It dries, it cracks. Insects consume it. Moisture breaks it down. Again, the system vanishes while the stone remains. Then there are the tools that were never objects at all. Water is a tool. It reveals flatness by pooling in low spots. It reduces friction when poured over surfaces. It cools heated stone during fire setting. It drives expansion in wooden wedges. Yet water leaves no trace. It evaporates. It drains. It rejoins the cycle. Gravity is a tool. It pulls stones into alignment once surfaces are prepared. It assists in lowering blocks. It compresses joints under weight. But gravity is not an artifact. It is a condition. It operates silently. Seasonal planning is a tool. Knowing when rivers are low allows transport. Knowing when temperatures drop prevents cracking during fire setting. Knowing when labor is available coordinates effort. But seasons are not preserved in the ground. They are preserved only in the patterns of work that respond to them. This reframes what a tool is. A tool is not only the object held in the hand. A tool is anything that transforms effort into outcome. Wood that expands, water that levels, gravity that aligns, time that corrects. Ancient construction and relied on systems, not isolated instruments. A single copper blade is useless without sand to cut with, water to cool with, and the knowledge of how much pressure to apply. The blade alone survives, the system does not. And so the archaeological record misleads. It presents us with fragments, chisels, hammerstones, drills, and asks us to reconstruct the whole. But the fragments were never the whole. They were only the durable remnants of a larger perishable process. Archaeologists recover what resists decay. They catalog metal. They measure stone. They photograph pottery. But the ropes that lifted, the levers that shifted, the wedges that split, the water that leveled, the rhythm that coordinated. These do not fossilize. What this means is that absence in the archaeological record is not the same as absence in history. The tools existed, they worked, they left results that remain undeniable, but they were made of materials that could not endure, or they were environmental conditions that could not be cataloged. The mystery is not that the tools are missing. The mystery is that we expected them to remain. But even when tools disappear, stone remembers something else. Not the object that shaped it, but the motion, the pressure, the sequence. If tools vanish, can the stone itself tell us how it was shaped? Stone does not record intention. It records contact. Every surface that was worked carries traces of the motion that shaped it, pressure, direction, repetition. But these traces do not explain themselves. They do not identify the tool. They do not reveal the sequence. They only show that something happened repeatedly until the stone changed form. This makes stone a witness, not a narrator, and modern observers often misread the testimony. There are three primary ways stone is shaped: impact, abrasion, and controlled fracture. Each leaves a distinct signature, but only if you know what to look for. Impact marks appear when a tool strikes stone with force. The result is a depression, often irregular, with radiating fractures around the edges. Hammerstones leave these marks. Chisels driven by mallets leave these marks. The pattern is chaotic. The depth varies. If many impacts occur in sequence, the surface becomes pockmarked, rough, uneven. Abrasion marks appear when a harder material is dragged or rotated across stone. The result is a smooth depression, often with parallel scratches where individual grains carved microchannels. Sand leaves these marks. Quartz powder leaves these marks. The pattern is directional. The depth is consistent. If abrasion continues long enough, the surface becomes polished, reflective, uniform. Controlled fracture appears when stone is split along natural planes of weakness. The result is a clean break, often with a slightly concave surface where tension pulled the material apart. Wedges leave these marks. Thermal shock leaves these marks. The pattern is linear. The edges are sharp. If fracture is repeated carefully, the surface can be shaped without grinding. Each method produces a different record, and each record can be misinterpreted. At Aswan, the unfinished obelisk remains partially carved from the bedrock. The trench surrounding it is deep, over 1 meter in places. The walls of the trench show long grooves running parallel to the obelisk's length. These grooves are rounded at the bottom. They do not taper. They do not wander. They repeat at regular intervals. In the early 20th century, Reginald Engelbach examined these grooves. He noted their uniformity. He measured their width and depth. He observed that they did not behave like chisel marks. Chisel marks are angular. They show variation. They cluster where effort concentrated. These grooves were different. They suggested a process that moved steadily, that applied pressure without deviation, that wore stone away rather than breaking it. Engelbach proposed that the grooves were made by pounding stones. Hard dolerite balls struck repeatedly against the granite. Experimental archaeology later tested this. Dorite could indeed wear granite down, but the resulting grooves were rougher, less regular. The bottoms were flatter, not rounded. The unfinished obelisk grooves remained unexplained. Decades later, Christopher Dunn examined drill holes in granite artifacts. He measured the spiral grooves inside the holes, marks left by the drilling process. The grooves descended at a consistent rate. Modern machining comparisons suggested a feed rate, how quickly the drill advanced per rotation, that exceeded what hand-driven copper tools should achieve. Dunn did not claim ancient machines existed. He claimed the marks did not match the tools historians assumed were used. This distinction is critical. Stone preserves the result of a process, but it does not preserve the name of the tool. A rounded groove could be made by a rotating copper tube fed with sand. It could also be made by a wooden dowel rotated under pressure with abrasive slurry. Both would leave similar traces. Both would work, but only one survives in the archaeological record. When modern observers examine ancient stone, they search for familiar signatures. They expect to see hammer blows, chisel scars, drill chatter. These are the marks left by tools they recognize. But if the tools were different, if they operated on principles of abrasion rather than impact or thermal stress rather than cutting, then the marks will also be different. And those marks will appear anomalous, unexplainable, even impossible. The stone is not lying. The interpretation is incomplete. This is why surface analysis alone cannot solve the mystery. The marks are real. The measurements are accurate. But without understanding the system that produced them, the marks remain ambiguous. A smooth surface could result from prolonged abrasion or from polishing or from both applied in sequence. A rounded channel could result from rotary motion or from rocking motion or from water erosion after the fact. The stone shows the outcome. It does not show the steps. And yet the stone does reveal something else, something often overlooked: consistency. When the same type of mark appears repeatedly across different sites, it suggests the same process was used. Not necessarily the same tool, but the same principle, the same understanding of how stone responds to pressure, friction, and time. This consistency implies transmission. Knowledge passed from one generation to another, from one region to another, not through written instructions, but through demonstration, through practice, through the quiet accumulation of experience. But here another problem emerges. If the methods were effective, if they produced results that still impress us today, why were they not documented? Why do we find no manuals, no diagrams, no step-by-step guides carved into temple walls or written on papyrus? The stone records behavior, but it does not explain how that behavior was learned, preserved, or taught. And without that explanation, the knowledge itself becomes as invisible as the tools that carried it out. Stone remembers motion, but it does not remember meaning. It shows us what happened, but not why, or how the knowledge of what to do survived long enough to be repeated across centuries. That silence is as profound as the silence in the grooves themselves. If methods were effective, why weren't they written down? The intelligence survived. The technique did not. This is the paradox at the center of ancient stonework. The civilizations that built these structures were not primitive. They had mathematics, astronomy, administration, writing systems capable of recording complex ideas. Yet nowhere in their surviving texts do we find instructions for how to shape granite-fit megaliths or transport stones weighing hundreds of tons. The absence is deliberate, but not in the way conspiracy theories suggest. Writing in ancient societies was reserved. It recorded what needed to outlast memory, rituals that must be performed correctly, tributes owed to temples, the names of kings, and the dates of their reigns. Writing was not a casual tool. It was formal, sacred, administrative. It preserved what the state required to function and what the gods required to be honored. Technical knowledge was not considered worthy of this permanence. Craft skills were passed differently, not through text, but through presence. A master stoneworker did not write down how to level a surface or judge the angle of a fracture. He demonstrated. The apprentice watched, then repeated, then felt the resistance in the stone, the rhythm of the mallet, the moment when pressure became too much or too little. This transmission was embodied. The knowledge lived in hands, in posture, in the subtle adjustments made without conscious thought. A stoneworker knew when a surface was flat, not by measuring it, but by feeling the scrape of the polishing stone change texture. He knew when a block was ready to move, not by calculation, but by the sound it made when struck. This kind of knowledge cannot be written. You cannot describe in words the exact pressure needed to guide a copper tube through granite using sand. You cannot diagram the micro-corrections required to keep abrasion uniform. These are learned through repetition, through failure, through the accumulation of small errors that teach the body what the mind cannot articulate. And because this knowledge was embodied, it was also fragile. It required continuity. A master trained apprentices over years, sometimes decades. The apprentice lived with the work, observed it daily, participated in it gradually. By the time the master aged, the apprentice had internalized not just the technique, but the judgment, the intuition that allowed adaptation when conditions changed. But if that lineage broke, the knowledge vanished. Social disruption could sever it. Invasion, famine, plague, political collapse. If a generation of masters died before training successors, the skills died with them. The intelligence of the society remained, the language remained, the writing remained, but the practice knowledge, how to do the work, disappeared. Cultural shift could also erase it. If a society decided that speed mattered more than permanence or that mortar was more efficient than perfect fit, then the old methods became unnecessary. Apprentices were not trained in techniques that were no longer valued. Within a generation, no one remembered how it had been done. This happened repeatedly across history. Roman concrete replaced earlier stonework not because concrete was superior in all ways, but because it was faster. Medieval cathedrals used mortar extensively, not because precise stone fitting was impossible, but because it was no longer economically practical. The knowledge of how to achieve tight joints without binding agents faded, not because it was lost in catastrophe, but because it was abandoned by choice. The intelligence of the later builders was not less. Their priorities were different, and yet the stone remains. Structures built with methods no longer practiced, surfaces finished to standards no longer pursued, joints fitted with care no longer economical. The results endure while the process that created them became invisible. This creates a distortion in how we interpret the past. We see the outcome and assume the capability must have been extraordinary. We see precision and assume advanced tools. We see scale and assume complex machinery. But what we are actually seeing is the result of time, patience, and embodied knowledge applied by people who were not more intelligent than us, but who worked within a different framework. They had time. They had continuity. They had social structures that valued long-term craft over short-term output. When those conditions changed, the techniques changed with them. not because the knowledge was destroyed, but because it was no longer transmitted. The craft died quietly. No dramatic collapse, no burning of libraries, no sudden forgetting, just a slow shift in priorities, a gradual replacement of old methods with faster ones, a generation that learned differently. And then another until one day no one living knew how the old work had been done. The stone remained, but the lineage that shaped it did not. And this raises a deeper question. If the knowledge was so effective, if it produced results that still impress us millennia later, why did it decline at all? What changed? Not in capability, but in value. If the knowledge existed, why did precision eventually decline? Precision did not vanish because it became impossible. It vanished because it became unnecessary. Mortar filled gaps, bricks stacked faster, concrete poured quickly, populations grew, emperors demanded monuments within their reigns, time compressed. The old methods worked, but speed mattered more than permanence. Precision became impractical, not lost. The similarities are undeniable. Peru, Egypt, India, Mediterranean, different cultures, same precision. Stone behaves identically everywhere. Same problems, similar answers. Convergence, not inheritance. Ancient texts hint at unconventional methods. Ply described wooden wedges expanding with water. Fire setting caused thermal fracture. Inca legends mention softened stone. Missing steps, not missing science. The problem is not missing machines. It is missing time. Ancient builders measured progress in seasons, generations. Modern experiments compress this into days, apply force where patience was used and fail. A tool was water-finding level. Gravity aligning stone rhythm, coordinating effort. Patience correcting error. The methods disappeared. The scaffolds rotted. The sand washed away. Only stone remains. What feels impossible today once felt ordinary. The silence is not evidence of mystery. It is evidence of work done so patiently the process erased itself. Ancient builders did not dominate stone. They listened to it.